Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about some of the countries in Western Europe that are talking about very slightly tightening up immigration regulations and the sort of immigrants they want to take in, and it's a lot of hot air. It's really only under discussion, and as we know from the annual announcements by the British government as an example, how they're going to crack down and get tough on migrants, that sort of thing, and how nothing ever happens, and anything that they do put up is inevitably stopped in some international human rights court, and then the government, who never really was serious about doing anything anyway about migration, they then say, well, look, there's nothing we can do. The courts just won't let us. We tried, but there you go. So this is very much the merry-go-round that you see in Europe. And even if you look at, say, the Italian centre-right government fronted by Giorgia Meloni, she was talking tough about immigration, stopping it and preventing it, but she's not done anything. In fact, the reverse is the case. The illegal immigration in particular has increased. So and now recently Meloni was talking about how Europe needs migrants and Italy needs migrants, that sort of thing. So really she's been, assuming she ever was a centre-right politician representing the people in the first place, I think she was always a stalking horse for the globalists, which is, of course, very disappointing. But there you go. But the interesting thing was I saw an article saying extreme measures being taken by European countries. This was an Indian media outlet that was reporting on this. And these guys are quite prominent in India as a media outlet. So they were saying there's these super harsh measures, crackdown, cruel, evil, white crackdown. Rich countries are cracking down on the poor. The poor and oppressed are being pushed back. Little babies are being denied, and so on. So very emotive language. So I thought, wow, I'm not aware of any European or white country legislation to limit or prevent immigration. In fact, the reverse is the case. So I thought I better have a look at this. This Indian newscast. So they see things very differently. They see it from, if you like, the other end of the telescope, but they perceive it as as Indians, their birthright entitlement to go at any time they choose to rich white countries. Not to the poor countries, but to the rich white countries. It is their birthright entitlement. And they see that they have and should have no barriers at all to this. So any requirement to, for example, speak good English or have internationally recognized qualifications, have relevant experience, have needed skills in a particular economy, be at a certain age, only certain family members allowed, any restriction or any limitation or any criteria at all that has to be met is considered as not only outrageous, but evil, if not vindictive and criminal. What right do these white countries have to place criteria on us, the Indians? Now, I've come across some well-to-do, or not necessarily well-to-do, but doing all right type Indian or people from the subcontinent generally, and they think it's that white countries are morally inferior, spiritually inferior, and culturally inferior. Therefore, what right do people who are so inferior have to demand, standards be met by immigrants, Indian immigrants or subcontinent immigrants? What right do these morally inferior people have to say to us, well, do you have an internationally recognized, university qualification, or do you have relevant or needed skills and experience, this sort of thing? But to give you some idea, in the subcontinent, for every job that's available that pays a wage, you're not just like a live-in slave servant type thing, But for any job that pays a wage in the subcontinent, there are something like 3,000 applicants for each job. Now, that'll give you, some say it's not really 3,000, but it's 2,000. But it doesn't matter if it's 2,000 or 3,000. At that point, it ceases to be relevant. There are so many more people than there are jobs. You can. This is paying jobs, by the way. You can understand why people would, the people want to get out. I mean, but instead of wanting to improve their own country, and instead of trying to stop the corruption in their own country, or improve the standards of, work ethics or education or, any of that sort of thing, the patronage, the terrible runaway patronage machine that exists there for the elites, instead of trying to correct that and fix their own country up, they just want to go to the West. Now, the Indians have an interesting view on wealth. They don't perceive that wealth is created or generated, that they have no concept of that in their culture or in their sense of logic, that they just can't comprehend it. So to them, wealth is something that's static and fixed. And if you want to get more of it, you've got to take what the other guys got. And if you can get what the other guys got through means of trickery or deception or any underhanded means, and that's fine. That's quite acceptable. It just means you're smarter than them. Therefore, you're entitled to whatever you got. Whatever you deceived from someone else means you're a bit smarter than they are. You're therefore entitled to it, and it's quite justified to do that. So they have this concept of wealth as being static. So in order to get wealth, they have to go to the rich white countries and take what's there. Now, the Indian, even the upper class Indians, not necessarily the Brahmins, I mean them too, but particularly the upper class Indians generally, could be say upper class, the merchant classes, and they perceive that the wealth of the world should be shared equally. They see that the white countries simply have too much wealth, and that is in itself an evil and a wrong and something that must be undone and corrected, and therefore either that wealth is taken from white people and brought to India or to the subcontinent, or Indian people go to the white countries and take the white wealth. But it should be more even and equal as in outcomes. The Indians fervently believe this, and they have an unshakable conviction that's what it must be. Now, I'm also aware of pretty much every Indian I've met. They say they've dreamed from children, from as soon as they could read or listen to fairy stories and once upon a time in a land far away. That their fairy stories are how they're going to get to a white country and get all that lovely loot that the white people have. Indian nationalists, or generally could be Pakistani nationalists, love to adhere to the view, well, the reason that our countries are dirt poor shitholes isn't because of the corruption, isn't because of the religious and tribal strife. It's not because of the patronage. It's not because of the laziness. It's not because of any of those things. It's because those damn fucking white people stole it all. So we're only going to go over there to those white countries to take back what they stole from us anyway. So you see, it's still justice, social justice, restorative justice. So these media outlets report on these Europe. Now there's some meetings in Germany where they're thinking of considering putting some very, very limited restrictions on immigration that I can't see would have any difference. It's just tough talk to say we're going to deport those people who are here illegally. Now, we know nothing's going to happen. If it does happen, it's hardly likely to happen to many people. But Indians are notorious, not only for illegal migration, but also in Australia, we see this, it's widespread here in Australia, visa overstays. So they'll arrive as a tourist or something like that, and maybe they've got family here, but they'll arrive as a tourist on say a 30-day or a 90-day or whatever is tourist visa, and then when the visa expires, they'll go and say, I'm claiming asylum because of such and such, and that because the asylum verification process is so slow and cumbersome and so prone to being exploited, mischievously exploited, it can be years before a determination's made. So, hey, you didn't get asylum, buddy. But then they can play the race card and say, well, I'm brown or black or this and that. And then they can go through another legal process. And there's lots of NGOs that'll pay all their legal fees and this sort of thing. And And then they can say, well, I've been here for 10 years fighting legally, I've had children born here and I've got relatives, so now you have to let me stay. And often they'll win the case. So that simply encourages more Indians to come over. And, you can have as many, just in the space of a few months, you can have, 20 or 30,000, this is in Australia, 20 or 30,000 visa overstays all claiming asylum, which is a massive scam. But anyway, so the Indians will be, particularly sensitive to this. So anything that may or even possibly, even remotely result in Indians being deported or being refused entry or not being given visas or anything like that, the Indian media goes into absolute hyperdrive over this. It's an outrage. It's beyond outrageous. It transcends outrage. It's the outrage of outrages. If anything might, not is, or has been legislated, but might result in any sort of slowdown or any restriction or any barriers to Indians at a whim, just going to any country, white country that they choose to go to. So now, again, the idea of what is a refugee? Is a refugee someone who's escaping, for example, a war-torn situation? And is that war sort of permanent? Is it a temporary thing? Is it when the worst of it's over, you go back to your village? Because a refugee, in my view, a refugee is someone who maybe there is a war or something like that, maybe a terrible famine or something that's in their area where they've lived forever, or where the descendants have lived, and so the United Nations sets up a refugee camp in some sort of area that isn't affected by the war, where people can be temporarily accommodated until they're ready to go back to their place of origin. Now, that to me is a genuine refugee. You can have refugees in the sense where, if they're going to be sent back, they've escaped some sort of terrible danger. Maybe they're I don't know. Maybe they're being targeted by a mafia group. I mean, who knows? But they're in some sort of mortal danger and going back. For a case in point would be, say, after World War II, where the workers that had been brought into Europe during the war from Russia were going to be repatriated to Russia, but the Russian government, the Stalinist regime, had a view that anybody who'd been exposed to Western lifestyles and attitudes and so, because even Nazi Germany, the Russians viewed Nazi Germany as offering people, many freedoms, many more freedoms than the Russians offered. And you think Nazi Germany was tough, but the Russians were way tougher on personal freedoms and liberties. So when these people are going to be repatriated to Russia, they were able to argue, and not all of them, but some of them were able to argue, hey, if we go back, we're going to be thrown into prison or even killed for just having the wrong political attitudes, or political views, or even having been exposed to non-communist political views and social lifestyles. So if we go back, we're going to be in danger. And so those people could become refugees. So that's a classic example of refugee status. But this is not what the Indians look at, and increasingly the United Nations is shifting their views on that, or shifting their language on that. Escaping poverty which is another way of saying an economic migrant. Hey, I want to go over there where all the money is, because and where the welfare system is generous. I want to go there. Well, sure, everybody does. I mean, fuck. And we need to really sort of understand that in the world, just in the Indian subcontinent alone, there are pushing 2 billion people, 90% of whom are living dirt poor lifestyles, and where over a billion people are hand-to-mouth subsistence farmers with a very low life expectation existence. It's not surprising we see people in their 20s with no teeth and with malnourished, rickets and all sorts of things like that. There are billions of those people around the world who all want to come to the rich West and all want to have, especially in the refugee camps, these were illiterate peasants. They're illiterate in their own language, and they're fed these fairy stories of once upon a time in a land far away, where there are these white countries where they give you a free house, they send you to school for free, you get university for free, everything for free, and more free, and then more free on top of that. And they go, whoa, holy fuck, I want to go there. And so, well, if you want to go there, we've got a nice transport infrastructure, a pipeline to deliver you there. We'll bus you here, we'll coach you there, we'll even tell you what lies to tell the immigration department when you get there. We've got boats to carry you here. We've got these camps where we'll feed you and clothe you and a massive infrastructure that none of these people would attempt the journey without this massive globalist infrastructure assistance. So it's all very artificial. But coming back to the Indian media thing, they're in hyperdrive. If the mere thought that there may be some restrictions placed on Indians moving around at whim is enough to send them hysterical and to make the most ridiculous claims. To them, any restriction at all, for any reason, for any cause, no matter how justified, sensible or reasonable, is somehow a direct attack on Indians. It is an evil attack on Indians. That's what it is, and it can be seen as nothing else because any restriction is evil. Now, this perception of refugee means somebody who just wants to put a few more bucks in their pocket. Again, we've got the thing here. Okay, India is a dirt poor basket case and has been for 1,000 years, and there's always been a rich elite, a tiny rich elite, stealing everything they can from the poor. That's always been. So this idea that India was a rich country, that's crap. There's there was only ever 1% or less of the population doing very nicely, while the rest were poor. And again, the 3/4 of the population being hand-to-mouth peasants that were being horribly exploited. So this idea that India was this rich paradise is utter and total bullshit. But the Indians, rather than fix their own country up, they've almost given up in their own country. Whilst they perceive their own culture and they're morally, culturally, and spiritually superior in every way to the West, they seem to have given up on their own country. It's impossible to fix it. It just can't be done. That the country is fucked, and that's it. We maintain our spiritual and moral superiority to everyone else, but the country economically and organisationally and structurally is fucked. Nothing can be done. The only solution is for us to get out of the country. So this is a strange sort of thing. Now, I've spoken to a lot of Indians when they come to the West, and they still got that horrible chip on the shoulder thing that the Indians have, but they take the view that they'll openly say, look, the reason we've come to the West is because there's far less corruption. We get the education, we get the medical care. Even if you've got money in India, unless you've got a decent amount of it, you still have to wait a long time for any medical care. And if you're poor, forget it. And so they look at the West as being, the West is much cleaner. The buses and the trains run on time. It's not overcrowded. It's the corruption's less. The services are much better place to bring up kids. There's not the smog. There's not this. There's not the overcrowding. They'll list off many, many reasons why the West is much better than India. And there are job opportunities here. In India, you've got 2,000 applications for a job, but here you may only get 100 applications. This sort of thing. So they'll talk about the West. This is why we came to the West, because it's so much better. But then they sort of pivot almost immediately and say that the West is inferior. It's actually an inferior place, and they come with their moral, cultural, and spiritual and genetic purity type attitudes, and assume that the West is inferior in all those ways, which means the Indians that come are the superior class to the white people in the West. And it's all quite confusing to understand. But because they believe they're entitled to come to the West and they have this cultural superiority attitude, then they perceive any restriction on their movements or is simply an outrage. Now, when you talk to these people about, well, if you don't have qualifications that are needed in the economy, or you've got qualifications by bribing a lecturer or someone in a university in India, and you haven't actually studied the thing, but why would you? Why do you think that entitles you? Their response is, well, it's India is corrupt. That's what we have to do to get it. We got to bribe people to do it. That's just how things are. And so if you got to bribe them, why would you also bust your ass studying as well when you can get it by bribing somebody? So just because we have to bribe people as part of our situation in India, why should that be a limit? But don't you understand that if you want to say you have a skill, that you actually need to have that skill? And they look at you in amazement. Well, no, if I say I have the skill, who cares? Why do I have to be placed in a situation where I have to tell the truth and put facts forward? Why do I have to do that? That limits what I can do. That restricts what I can do. So if I tell lies to get what I want, then there's nothing wrong with that, or put fake information on a form or this sort of thing. And they've got no concept. And you try and explain it was that attitude is why India is a poor country. Do you get it? That no, India's a poor country because too many peasants want too much, and again they have no concept of this, and I find that intriguing. But now the other thing that comes up is the Indians point out how, and many other Western people do, is how clever the Indians. They're so clever. They're so clever. Look how well they do at school. All right, well, let's concede that they didn't used to do well until affirmative action education came in. So I'd question that cleverness thing. But let's assume that's the case. All right, then Indians are so incredibly clever, so terribly clever. Why are they not clever in their own country? Why can they not be clever in India? And if they are so clever, why can they not fix the problem that the dirt poor basket case Indian economy has? And these are sort of the obvious questions that come up, but they shake their heads. Well, I don't know. And they're just difficult questions, or questions they just don't want to answer. But it intrigued me how the Indian media, at the mere mention there might be restrictions on immigration, to the West, to the rich white West, any mention of restrictions is seen as a death dagger to the heart of all Indians, but it gives, to me, it at least gives away their sense of utter entitlement. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.